You also met Dean, didn't you, James
Well,
Dean?
my very first night in Hollywood, I met James Dean. It was a very, very odd occurrence. I'd arrived off the plane, but those were, took a long time in those days, about 16 hours flight. And I'd been met by Grace Kelly and various people, but I found that I was alone for myself for the evening. And a woman I knew phoned up and said, let me take you out to dinner. And we went to various places, and she was wearing trousers, and they wouldn't let her in any of the smart Hollywood restaurants. Think of it, whatever it was, 1952, 54, something like that. However, we finally went to a little Italian dive, and that was full. And so one got turned away. I said, honestly, I don't mind just a hamburger anyway. I was hungry by then. And then I heard feet running down the street, and it was James Dean. And he said, I was in that restaurant, you couldn't get a table. And my name's James Dean. He said, will you come and join me? So we said, yes, very kind of him. And then going back into the restaurant, he said, before we go in, I must show you something. I've just got a new car. And there in the courtyard of this little restaurant was I don't know what the car was, some little silver, very smart thing, all done up in cellophane with a bunch of roses tied to its bonnet. And I said, how fast can you drive in this? He said, I can do 150 in it. And I said, have you driven it? He said, no, I've never been in it at all. And some strange thing came over me, some almost different voice. And I said, look, I won't join your table unless you want me to, but I must say something. Please do not get into that car, because if you do, and I looked at my watch, and I said, if you get into that car at all, it's now Thursday, whatever the date was, 10 o'clock at night, and by 10 o'clock at night, next Thursday, you'll be dead if you get into that car. I said, oh, nonsense. So we had dinner, we had a charming dinner, and he was dead the following Thursday afternoon in that car. It was one of those odd things.
Has it ever happened to you before?
No, I'm glad to say. But it was one of a very, very odd, spooky experience. He was I liked him very much too. I'd love to have known him more.
Yes.
I get very depressed if people send me a script or write saying, we have a part which is tailor-made for you. And in my more arrogant moments, I write back and say, well, it may be tailor-made for someone, but how do you know my measurements? Because if it's going to be tailor-made for that shape, I'm never going to expand. I dislike it when people think, well, that'll suit Alec Guinness. They probably tried 6 other people anyway. Because what makes me work at my best, I think, is always something just unattainable for me, something I have to reach for.
Sir Alec, I understand you had certain differences with the Cuban government.
Oh, I think that's all been greatly exaggerated in the press back home. I think the Cuban government was very anxious to point out that the story was in Batista's time and not under the present regime.
Did you agree to any alterations in the script?
No, there have been no alterations made so far that I know of, and I'm playing quite a big part in the film.
What was your impression of the new regime in Cuba?
Well, I've got nothing to compare it with, not having been there under the previous regime. But very alive, very stimulated, the city being painted up, all has gone out, all houses to be repainted by maid or something or other, and a great personal devotion, certainly among the poorer people, for Castro.
Did you meet Castro?
Yes, I met him 2 nights ago.
What was your impression of him?
Well, obviously a very courageous man, and a very impressive one. The fact that he walks around the streets, or he came out to see us shooting. I'm shooting film, not because they're slightly trigger happy, with no guard. I mean, there were a few odd policemen around, but unarmed and being embraced by the locals and embracing them in return, and very, very charming and impressive.
If we could go right back, Sir Alec, to your childhood. Your parents weren't actors. What did your father do?
Well, my father, I never knew. I mean, he was out of my life when I was, a baby. But he was a bank manager. No connection with the theatre at all. And I've really sort of lived on my own since I was about 14 or something like that, on and off.
So at what point did you realize that, you had to be an actor?
I don't know. I mean, hindsight and is very clever. I consciously knew I wanted to be an actor by the time I was 16, that's for sure. If I look back now, I think I always was an actor from, the age of 5 or 6 or something. I was always, in dormitories at school, telling stories. They'd all fallen fast asleep, but I went on telling, nighttime stories and acting them out madly in my bed in the dark.
And you've no idea why?
I suppose, I think it's a great mistake to, I would never go to a psychoanalyst to sort this out for me. I don't want to know why. I guess kind of lonelinesses and insecurity of personality and character, and therefore latching on to make-believe and pretending. For me, acting is just, let's pretend. Still is. You have to apply it, or you learn certain skills, and then they become too much, and you have to try and abandon them. But it is, let's pretend, and I think anything that goes much beyond that becomes pretentious.
Yes, I don't want to delve into pop psychology, but are you, as a generality, happier when you're acting than doing anything else?
I'm happier when I'm rehearsing, because then all antennae are out, particularly in the theatre, because the rehearsal period then lasts a month, roughly. Film rehearsals, of course, are inclined to be very, off the cuff and swift, but even then, it seems to me I'm at my most alive, both in trying to find a character, in the general situation, what the whole thing's about, and an alertness as to where one is and what one's doing. Once the acting job is started, it's, I suppose, like in a way, like an office job.
It was one of the periods in your life when I imagine you didn't feel particularly alive, was when you left school and went into an advertising agency.
Oh, yes.
You were a copywriter, weren't you?
I was a copywriter, and then they took me off that very kindly and made me a layout man. I was disastrous at that, and they put me back to copywriting.
What did you have to write?
I wrote boring little ads for Rose's lime juice at one time. I was virtually Wilkinson's razor blades, Philips lamps, Mallard radio, everything about which I knew nothing.
Did you come up with any original slogans?
Oh, no, me? No, for heaven's sake. No. I was in offices when original slogans came up. I have made very good friends. They were sweet to me there, but I earned £1 a week, £30 a week by the time I left.
Were you worth it?
No, I cost them a lot of money. The Daily Mail appeared one morning with a vast empty space, which is where my ad should have been.
What happened then? You decided advertising?
Well, I was always wanting to be an actor. It was a question of how to, I didn't know any actors. I didn't know how one started. And while I was at the advertising agency, I got onto Martita Hunt, who became a very great friend of mine, as I thought I would try and get into the Royal Academy. And I had no money, and so this meant trying to get a scholarship. And so I went to her for, hour lessons on my voice and this, that, and the other. I don't think she taught me a thing about anything to do there, but she taught me a lot about life. She formed my taste in many ways, which was far more valuable. And when I arrived at the appointed time at the Royal Academy, I was met by a lady who said, "What a good thing you haven't come down from Scotland. We're not giving any more scholarships this year." So I was left with egg on my face, to a degree, and near tears. And I ran into a girl whom I used to know as a child, but within minutes, and wept on her shoulder. And she said, "Well, you better run down Baker Street to the Faye Compton studio, where they are holding auditions this minute." And I dash there, and I was just in time, and I got the scholarship.
You eventually joined John Gielgud's company, and then you joined the Old Vic in 1936. But your film career really started in 1946 with Great Expectations, didn't it? Is that right?
That's right, yes. It was the first film I've done, apart from appearing for one day when I was a student as a walking on, you know, I mean, an extra in Evensong. And I swore I would never, ever do that again, the way they were treated.
What do you mean, the extras?
Yes, I thought, that's not for me. And I thought I will never go into films until if I'm going to be offered something in films, it must be something I've already played in the theatre. And it so happened that I'd done an stage adaptation of Great Expectations, in which I'd also appeared.
That's Herbert Pocket, wasn't it?
That's right, yes. And David Lean and Ronald Neame had seen that and remembered it, and then they decided to do the film, and they also remembered me, and as the war was coming to its close, they finished actually, contacted me. And that was the start of, you know, working for the films.
But even with that success, it's odd, it seems to me, that you managed to land the part of Fagin in Oliver Twist, because after all, you were still quite young, and in theory, for you to play Fagin was ridiculous.
Well, that's the only time I've ever gone out after a part. I absolutely was determined to play that. And David Lean was wonderful. I mean, he listened to me. I mean, my thing to him was at the time, oh, you would never think of, when I heard they were going to do Oliver Twist, you'd never think of casting me as Fagin. He said, not in 1,000 years, you know. And I said, that's where you're wrong, because you people in films are only interested in types. You're not interested in anyone actually trying to act. And I think he was a bit startled and didn't agree. And he said, well, I'll give you a test. So a test was arranged, and I got it.
Mind you, your interpretation of the part caused a little trouble, I think, in America. They were a bit touchy about it, weren't they?
Yes, the Russians were touchy about it in Central Europe, because they were, you know, determined that it should be called anti-Semitic. The word Jew was never mentioned in it, because there was no question of it being anti-Semitic. As indeed, you know, Dickens was accused of being anti-Semitic, which he hadn't, and then he went and wrote another novel, you know, to make a sympathetic. I mean, I maintain the character had been, you know, Jew, Arab, or nothing.
In the 60s, your film output slowed down. You did a lot of stage work, Ross, Exit the King, Macbeth, Dylan on Broadway. Do you think of yourself first and foremost as a man of the theatre?
I think of myself as an actor. Yes, I'm sure. But I started in the theatre. My early years were the theatre. And funnily enough, I've nearly always, with the exception, I think, of 1 year, when I did maybe 2 or 2.5 films in, I have always managed to do something in the theatre in it, because it's very good, I find, to tackle or come in face to face with a live audience. And I also wanted to keep my, you know, many actors who go into films who've been in the stage, and long years go by, and then they get a chance to go into the theatre again, and they become petrified at facing an audience and shy away from it and get very frightened. And I was being determined that that shouldn't happen to me. And on the whole, I'm happier in the theatre, not from any other reason than in the theatre you're your own boss. If something has to be cut, you know, a scene has to go, or a few lines or a speech or something, then you can mold your performance round that gap, or if something extra goes in, whatever the case may be. Whereas acting for the films, which has its other delights, if something goes, you cannot adjust your performance if it's snipped at the end. I mean, I've seen performances of myself on the screen in which the end has been put at the beginning, and vice versa. And if I knew that had been going to happen, I would have performed differently throughout. And so I feel I'm not my own boss when filming, whereas I am in the theatre.